10 years ago, a small development team stood on a brightly lit stage and made a promise they absolutely could not keep. They sold the gaming community an entire universe, an infinite sandbox where every single star in the sky was a destination you could seamlessly travel to. We all know the infamous story of that launch. We know the massive wave of disappointment, the backlash, and the absolute silence that followed before the developers put their heads down and went to work. But sitting here in 2026, playing a game that is officially a decade old, I realized something that almost nobody is talking about anymore. We spend so much time praising the studio for fixing their mistakes that we rarely stop to examine the actual game they left behind. When you strip away the incredible redemption story and look purely at the mechanics, the pacing, and the design, you have to ask if this classic title actually holds up against modern standards. The reality I found after diving back in for over 100 hours is far more complex than just a good comeback story. The moment you wake up on your first planet, the game establishes a very specific rhythm. Your hazard protection is immediately failing, the environment is harsh, and you are frantically looking around for glowing yellow plants just to stay alive. In these opening hours, it is a pure survival experience. The controls feel surprisingly tight for a game of this age. Movement has a pleasant weight to it, and your jetpack provides a very satisfying sense of verticality. Mining resources with your multi-tool starts off as a desperate necessity and eventually becomes a meditative routine. However, there is a distinct stiffness to the character animations and the basic interactions that definitely shows the game's age. It lacks the ultra-fluid, motion-captured grace of the heavy hitters we are playing today. You can feel the underlying grid of the inventory system in every action you take, forcing you to play a constant game of menu management. Just when that inventory juggling starts to feel like a tedious chore, the game quietly pulls a trick that completely shifts your perspective on what you're actually doing. That shift happens the very first time you repair your starter ship and break through the atmosphere of your starting planet. Even in 2026, there is genuine magic in aiming the nose of your rusty spacecraft at the sky and seamlessly transitioning from a localized ground environment into the vast, open vacuum of space. There are no loading screens masking this transition, and the sheer scale of the system you suddenly find yourself in is staggering. Flight controls are decidedly arcade-style rather than simulation-heavy. You're not worrying about complex orbital mechanics or thruster degradation. You point, you thrust, and you go. This simplicity works perfectly for the tone of the game, keeping the focus on discovery rather than technical mastery. But as you admire the rings of a distant gas giant, a sudden blip on your radar brings a harsh reminder that you're not alone out here. Space combat is loud, chaotic, and visually spectacular, but if we are being completely honest, it lacks serious depth. Dogfighting consists mostly of locking onto enemy pirate ships, managing your shield recharges, and holding down the trigger until they explode into a shower of crafting materials. The encounters are a fun distraction, but they will never challenge a dedicated space combat veteran. This same mechanical shallowness bleeds over into the ground combat. When you inevitably anger the Sentinels, the robotic police force that patrols nearly every planet, the gunplay reveals its weakest links. Firing your weapon feels a bit floaty, lacking the punchy, kinetic feedback we expect from modern shooters. Enemies tend to rush you directly or float in predictable patterns. You're never really pushed to use advanced tactics or clever cover. You just upgrade your shields, install a better firing module, and outstat the enemy. Yet, despite this blatantly simple combat loop, I found myself playing until 3 in the morning, completely unable to put the controller down. The reason for that deep level of addiction lies entirely in the world design and the pure joy of exploration. Procedural generation was a dirty word in gaming for a long time, often resulting in massive worlds that felt completely empty. Here, the algorithm has been tweaked and refined over a decade to produce some genuinely breathtaking vistas. You will land on planets covered in glowing bioluminescent grass under a purple sky, or trudge through violently radioactive storms where giant worm creatures breach the surface in the distance. Does it have the insane texture resolution or ray-traced perfection of modern blockbusters? No, it does not. If you look closely, you will see muddy textures and popping objects, but the art direction completely carries the visual experience. The bold, vibrant color palettes inspired by classic science fiction book covers gave the universe a timeless, stylized look that ages incredibly well. You are constantly driven to see what weird, impossible landscape is waiting in the next star system. That sense of atmosphere is heavily carried by the sound design and the musical score. The soundtrack provided by the post-rock band 65 Days of Static is nothing short of a masterpiece. It dynamically shifts based on your actions, rising into intense, driving synths when you are in danger, and fading into melancholy, echoing guitar notes when you are walking alone on a dead moon. The sound effects of the alien wildlife, the deep bass rumble of a massive freighter warping into the system, and the satisfying crunch of mining materials all blend together to create an auditory experience that easily rivals anything released this year. It makes the universe feel alive and slightly dangerous, perfectly complementing the lonely tone of the narrative. Speaking of the narrative, it is very easy to dismiss this title as just a sandbox toy with no real story. That is a massive misconception. The main storyline, particularly the Artemis path, is incredibly thoughtful and surprisingly emotional. It does not rely on heavily directed cinematic cutscenes or traditional character development. Instead, the lore is delivered through ancient ruins, cryptic text logs, and interactions with strange alien species. The story tackles massive existential questions about reality, simulation, loneliness, and what it means to leave a legacy in a universe that will eventually reset. It is a slow burn that requires you to read and think, but the payoff is a deeply philosophical conclusion that stays with you long after you put the game away. It is not the flashy, character-driven drama of a modern RPG, but it respects your intelligence and lets you piece the mystery together at your own pace. To support your journey to the center of the galaxy, the game layers on a mountain of RPG systems and optional side content that has grown exponentially over the years. You can become a deep space trader, manipulating local economies. You can focus entirely on base building, snapping together incredibly complex structures to create a home on a hostile world. You can recruit a massive fleet of frigates and send them out on real-time expeditions, or explore derelict freighters that feel like miniature horror games. The progression system is deeply satisfying. Every action rewards you with currency or nanites, allowing you to constantly upgrade your suit, your ship, and your tools. The choices you make are mostly about personal expression rather than branching story consequences, but the sheer volume of things to do ensures that you will never run out of goals. Playing this on modern 2026 hardware highlights just how far the technical performance has come. Gone are the days of the stuttering frame rates and aggressive pop-in that plagued the early years. The game runs incredibly smoothly, handling the seamless transitions from ground to space with absolute ease. The loading times when initially booting up the game or teleporting between distant space stations are virtually non-existent now. It feels like the technology has finally caught up to the original ambition of the developers, allowing the game to breathe and operate exactly as it was always intended to from the very beginning. Looking back at the entire package, it is impossible to deny the massive legacy this game has left on the industry. It proved that live service games do not have to be predatory, and that a dedicated team can earn back the trust of their community through hard work and free updates. It has its weaknesses, absolutely. The combat is undeniably basic, the inventory management can be tedious, and after 100 hours, you will start to see the seams in the procedural generation. The illusion of infinity eventually breaks, revealing the repeating patterns underneath. But the core loop of exploring the unknown, upgrading your gear, and experiencing a profound sense of scale remains completely unmatched by almost anything else on the market today. If I have to give this classic a rating from a modern perspective, I confidently give it a solid 4 out of 5. It is a deeply flawed masterpiece that offers an experience no other space game has fully replicated. It trades deep combat and tightly scripted action for unparalleled freedom and atmospheric exploration. It is a game that you play to relax, to wonder, and to get lost in the stars. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a classic, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more honest, long-form gaming critiques. I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments, so let me know if you are still exploring the galaxy today or if you are thinking about jumping back in for the first time in years. Share this with a friend who needs a new game to play, and I will catch you all in the next one.